This program was funded in part by the Florida Public Broadcasting Service, Incorporated.
A flock of cormorants rests between feedings. A wood stork takes wing. Brown pelicans spend hours loafing in the midday sun. For the people who go beyond the boundaries of theme parks, past the towering hotels of city beaches, this is what Florida is all about. The idyllic scene exists, however, because it is Pelican Island, a part of a national wildlife refuge and a place outside the range of human interference. Located in the Indian River on Florida's east coast, some 45 miles south of Cape Canaveral, the refuge is made up of 4,300 acres of bottomlands and mangrove islands. This particular island, where the trees have been beaten down by many years of nesting and roosting, holds an important place in conservation history. President Theodore Roosevelt established the first national wildlife refuge here in 1903. As the story goes, a German immigrant boat builder named Paul Kregel lived on the shore in a house overlooking the island. The seabirds were being slaughtered for their nuptial feathers used to decorate women's hats, and because fishermen erroneously considered pelicans a threat to their industry. And like the buffalo out west, pelicans were often used for target practice. Kregel became so enraged at the killings, he began firing warning shots at the hunters, and he became known as the Pelican Protector of the area. Word of his exploits reached President Roosevelt, who decided to declare the island a sanctuary, with Kregel as the wildlife manager. Over the years, the refuge area was expanded, and the protection one man offered the native birds continues today. But for pelicans that leave the refuge, and those that live in other parts of the peninsula, it can be a dangerous world. Modern-day dangers sound all too familiar. From the 40s to the 70s, DDT and DDE were used indiscriminately in the environment. The effects showed up in eggshells too fragile to survive, and the populations of brown pelicans from California to the eastern seaboard plummeted drastically during that era. In Louisiana, where the brown pelican is the state bird, the species became extinct. Florida has apparently escaped these ravages so far. Pelicans continue to exist in healthy numbers, thanks in part to federal protection under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, and despite threats from man and nature. Hurricanes, cold weather, red tide, and other natural disasters have, on occasion, wiped out parts of the pelican population. Pollution and loss of habitat are ever-increasing man-related problems. One of the oldest conflicts on the water has been one of pelican versus fishermen. Many anglers have long thought of pelicans as pests, as the birds dive for the bait fish. Pelicans have learned how to follow the fishermen to find dinner, but they haven't learned how to avoid the hooks and lines that can cause their death. One place that is, in a different way, hooked on pelicans is the Suncoast Seabird Sanctuary in Indian Shores near St. Petersburg. Located on the heavily populated Gulf Coast, this slim acre and a half of sand and palms is sandwiched among the high-rises and peppered with seabirds. Nestled between Gulf Boulevard and the Gulf of Mexico, the greatest source of noise inside the sanctuary isn't cars or waves, but birds. Many different types of permanently injured birds are on display to the public year-round and free of charge. Mostly, though, there are pelicans. The pens have held as many as 350 birds in different stages of rehabilitation. Some are being readied for a return to the wild, while others have injuries that make them unreleasable. Founder and director Ralph Heath tells how the sanctuary started with one small bird.
The sanctuary started unofficially on December 3rd, 1971, when I found a little cormorant we later named Maynard walking down Gulf Boulevard dragging a broken wing. I took care of the little bird thanks to help from a friend of mine who was a very good veterinarian. I brought the little bird back after the operation that he inserted a stainless steel pin in the bird's wing back to what was just our home here on the Gulf beaches with no sanctuary facilities or bird hospital facilities. The little bird survived, and I went down to the local fishing pier to get him some bait, told the fishing pier operator what I was going to do, and he saved me some fish the next couple of days. Called me up and said, well, not only have I saved you some bait fish, but I've got you an injured seagull. So I went down and picked up what was our second bird here at an unofficial start of the bird sanctuary. A couple of days later, some friends found a pelican all tangled up in fish hooks and fish lines down at John's Pass. That was our third bird. So the sanctuary really started completely by word of mouth. And then as word spread up and down the Gulf beaches, more and more birds started being brought in just by the general public. And then when our friends in the media picked up on the sanctuary and advertised what we were doing, it literally spread around the world.
Most of the birds at the Suncoast Seabird Sanctuary are collected by the staff several times a week from around Mangrove Islands in the Intracoastal Waterway. Woody Moulton joins Ralph today in the search for seabirds in trouble. They hope to find only birds that can be helped and then released on the spot, but they are prepared to bring the severely injured ones back to the infirmary. Woody's keen eye spots a likely target.
He got line all over him.
He tangled up or just sick?
He's tangled up and sick.
Both?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's line on him.
Yep, he sure does. That's his problem. One hook in the wing here. Line trailing from him.
He doesn't feel good, or he wouldn't let me get that close to him.
No, he doesn't feel good at all. He could have some additional damage thanks to the fish hook and fish line, but he does have one in his wing. See anything else on that side?
Skinny.
Pretty clean, but he is skinny.
He's starving.
Yep, he definitely has a problem. No, he's a youngster. And you can see what's the example right there of where he came in contact with a fish hook and fish line right there stuck in the underside of his wing. Well, he's going to go back.
Another method of pelican capture, popular among the birds, is to lure them to the boat with fish.
Here's one with a hole in the pouch.
Yeah, we don't worry about catching him. He's doing all right.
Like that. Okay, you got it.
There you go.
Whoa, whoa. Okay, it's all around her
Okay.
left wing there. Oh boy,
Oh,
look
boy,
at
look at
that cut.
See what happens when, look at the watermile filming on that thing. It's exactly what happens when line gets wrapped around the wing here. The thing you have to be careful about, though, is to not cut indiscriminately and leave line underneath the feathers, because this thing's got 4 or 5 strands around there that could easily form a tourniquet situation, and she'd lose the whole wing. So that's what we're doing now, is carefully getting it all off so we
Slip
don't
some of
lose
that
it.
flight feather through there.
Look at that.
Hold
Look
it.
at that water line around there.
Sinker and all.
Sinker and all. And that is what easily, right there, look at the amount of abrasion at the leading edge of that wing. Luckily, it did not actually impair the circulation, because the danger is there when the line gets around, tight around the limb like that, and there's no more circulation. Then, of course, the limb dies, and you wind up with a permanently crippled bird.
This we can turn loose.
Yeah, this one, that'll heal. That's been here before. What we'll do is we'll always give her a treat with a fish in the mouth for all her trouble, and then set her there and let her go. There you go.
That bird right there, yeah.
I don't think you don't see anything.
Bring him up here anyhow. There's something wrong with that wing there.
Oh, yeah, you're right. It's got
Looky here. Look at the hook right here.
Yep.
We got a double whammy here. Happy Christmas.
That is really hurt. Stuck in the bone.
We'll take this bird back.
Yeah, that one.
Let Barbara take that out.
You remove all the tourniquet situation right here, so at least this area doesn't die. These two birds are very lucky. This line could have been much tighter around their wings and caused them to have some severe problems. The biggest threat to pelicans themselves is the fish hooks and the fish line damage. About anywhere between 70 and 80% of all the pelicans that we see or rescue out on the islands have fish hook or fish line problems that obviously have curtail their ability to fly and feed. That's true with the pelicans. Other birds are more subject to other types of damage, such as herons flying into power lines, seagulls being hit by cars, hawks and owls being shot by crazy people out with guns using them for targets. But what's really interesting is since the history of the sanctuary and our record keeping, we've shown that approximately 90% of all the birds that have come in are injured by acts directly or indirectly related to man. A direct cause of injury would be if someone took a gun and intentionally shot at a bird. An indirect cause of damage would be something like flying into glass windows, hitting power lines, getting caught in man's pollution of the environment, whether it be oil, sewage, heavy metals, and things like that. Birds are certainly a unique indicator of environmental quality, and what affects them certainly shows up first because of their position in the food chain. And what the wildlife is trying to show is it can also be detrimental to us too.
When the bait fish started to run low, Ralph and Woody decided it was time to check out a mangrove island owned by the sanctuary. What they found was not unexpected.
This is an example of one of our own youngsters from the sanctuary. This is one of the babies that recently hatched out this past springtime. They came in here and got all tangled up in monofilament line, and this is what happens, as we talked about, when they fly back to any vegetation, whether it be live or dead branches like these are, it gets tangled up and hung up around anything that has to do with, like this protrusion right here. Of course, the line here was around his wing, and so he just literally hung there, trapped until he died, which is a real shame because it was a baby that was bred in captivity, and when he left the sanctuary, he was an extremely healthy and strong bird.
As they searched the mangroves, 3 more carcasses were discovered and 1 sick pelican was captured. Ralph explains the importance of the mangrove island to the coastal ecology.
The Mangrove Island is a very unique island along the coastal zones of Florida and other tropical areas because what it does is actually build land in salt water. It's a very hardy plant, except of course when the extreme cold hits it, like as we've seen in some of the limbs surrounding us. But basically what happens is it drops roots, and these roots grow trees that grow right in the saltwater environment. And as these roots spread out, organic matter, its own leaves, sand, other debris that wash by actually collect around the roots. And this is a land builder island. Basically, this is how land is built along the coastal zones, especially in the bays like we are right now. And it's an extremely valuable island to the ecosystem, not just to the marine environment, which is the surrounding grass flats or the nurseries for all types of seafood such as shrimp, crabs, and fish, but also the birds use it as their nesting and roosting area, and it becomes large rookeries for many of our species of seabirds.
Finally, it was time to return with the injured pelicans to the sanctuary infirmary. More than 500 pelicans a year with similar injuries are brought to the hospital for treatment. 80% of the birds' lives are saved, with 9 out of 10 of these able to be returned to the wild. Wildlife biologist Barbara Suto heads the medical team that operates on the hook and line injuries and then puts the birds on a recovery course.
As in the case with these 3 pelicans, they were given fluid therapy immediately because they were extremely thin and they hadn't eaten for a while. It is packed full of basic glucose, basic energy that we all run on. Well, the birds are the same. They run on that. And it's also got vitamins and minerals in it. Then they're put in isolation by themselves in kennels in our intensive care area. From there, the birds are monitored. The fluid therapy is kept up depending on how severe the bird was emaciated, how many times he gets that a day. They are kept in the hospital. It varies as to how thin they were or what the problem was. Anywhere from 3 days to 2 weeks, if need be. Tests are taken, fecals are taken to find out if they have parasites, and if they do have parasites, then we do worm them, because a bird that is wormed will gain weight faster and we can get him back out to the wild faster. When they can be removed from the hospital, the birds have recuperation pens outside. A lot of them, especially with hook and line damage, need to strengthen their muscles again to fly. A larger bird like a pelican, we have a flight pen just specifically for pelicans to build their muscles back up. They're not just tossed back out on the beach from in here. This is a jar that we keep the hook and lines that we get in throughout the year, each year. And as you can see, there's The birds carry quite a lot, and most birds with hook and lines, they will eventually get caught up, or they'll get caught up in their wings to where they can't fly, and I mean, it's a pretty horrible death to just be tangled up somewhere and starve to death.
One of the most important aspects of the sanctuary is the captive breeding program.
One of the major milestones of the Suncoast Seabird Sanctuary has been the breeding of the brown pelican in captivity. Years ago, when we had 20, 30, 40 permanently crippled birds in captivity, many people in the Audubon societies and even the scientific community and other ornithologists really criticized the sanctuary because they said, what on earth is the value of these permanently crippled birds that obviously can never fly, they can't feed themselves, you're just going to have to take care of them, they're going to cost you money, take up space. They're of no value. Why not just put them to sleep? And for our critics, I really never had a good answer as to why these birds should be kept alive other than the fact that I thought they deserved to live. But in 1975, two of our favorite pelicans got together, Salty and Alexis, and produced the first baby pelican ever successfully hatched and fledged in captivity, as far as we know, anywhere in the world. And since then, the other brown pelicans have paired off and gotten the message that there's more to life than just relaxing in the sun and eating fish, because they have produced hundreds of baby pelicans here since 1975 to fly away into the wild environment. And believe me, they're tough birds, and they certainly are helping to carry on their species here in Florida.
The approximate age of pelicans can be judged by coloration. The completely brown pelicans are 1 to 1.5 years old. At about 2 years, the head begins to turn white. By age 3, the head and neck are totally white, and the body has a silvery appearance. The yellow crown on the adult consists of feathers that grow in over the white head during the mating season. Both females and males look the same, except for a small difference in size. Ralph explains how the pelican pens at the sanctuary seem to act as a magnet to other seabirds in the area.
The sanctuary has become a true rookery for many, many birds late in the afternoon and early in the evening. We have several hundred egrets, herons, pelicans, and other birds come in here just to spend the night over their permanently crippled friends, and we welcome that. And they don't take advantage of us because they don't come here to eat. They just come here for a safe place to spend the night and then fly out early in the morning to get their own food and travel up and down the Florida West Coast. So it's a beautiful sight to see, especially late in the afternoon with all the birds coming in.
The pelicans of Florida's east coast face the same dangers as their west coast cousins. The area around Port Canaveral also has some helpful humans. Every weekend from November to June, Pat Fisher and assistant Roberta Lawrence search these waters for injured pelicans. Pat's organization is called Seabird Rescue, and it runs on a much smaller scale than the Suncoast Seabird Sanctuary. Pat and Roberta are beginning this day by releasing a rescued pelican that had swallowed a fishhook and had to have it surgically removed. Pat calls on the services of local veterinarians when medical attention is required.
Breakfast?
Lunch?
Another pelican is saved.
Stay away from fishermen.
Another day of patrolling begins. Using the fish baiting technique, Roberta lures in some pelicans. One is spotted with fishing line trailing from it. The pelican is hooked on the back of the neck. Pat feels that the hook is too close to the spine to risk further injury by trying to remove it. This pelican will have to go to a vet for treatment. Pat and Roberta see many hook and line injuries, but sometimes they find birds with frostbite or broken wings. Sometimes the hazards are hard to believe.
People have a lot of sense giving them catfish. Those things sticking out.
I didn't realize.
He couldn't even swallow it because it's stuck in his pouch.
The broken bones are probably caused by collisions with boat masts, power lines, and cars on coastal highways. The number of dead pelicans spotted today is high.
This one was all caught up.
What's wrong with it?
There are also many injured pelicans among the flocks inhabiting the busy port.
You can talk and say thank you.
About 7 years ago, we started coming over here and seeing just hurt pelicans flying by and on the shores and all over the place around here, and we could not do anything legally because we did not have permits. So I started getting some training, started joining organizations, and started reading a lot, and did volunteer work at the zoo. And fortunately, I personally knew some veterinarians that helped me with expertise. And then after I got my permits, we started doing it. But the reason is we like to help them, and there's a lot of birds that need help. We're a very small organization, and I suspect it's going to stay small for a while, but even if it's small, we're going to still keep doing it. I don't think we'll ever stop doing it. We'd feel guilty if we did because there's too many hurt birds.
Birds that require some recuperation are taken to the makeshift sanctuary in Roberta's backyard. Pat and Roberta are unable to keep the permanently injured pelicans they rescue. Those birds are given to Central Florida attractions that have educational displays of wildlife. At Discovery Island Zoological Park at the Walt Disney World Resort Complex near Orlando, birds and other animals of concern are bred and raised for the viewing public. 24 permanently injured pelicans lead pampered lives under the watchful eye of curator Charlie Cook.
All of the brown pelicans here at Discovery Island came from rehab centers in Florida. 16 of the birds came from the Suncoast Seabird Sanctuary. 8 of our pelicans this year came from Pat Fisher's rehab center in Orlando. And those 8 birds were 8 too many for Pat, and we helped him out by adding them to our flock here, and that was also based on the recommendation of Ralph Heath that told us that the birds would probably begin breeding if we increased their density. We had our first successful breeding last year when 2 baby brown pelicans were raised here. They're about 6 months old now. They fly around the Disney World area during the daytime, and then at night and in the morning they're here for the feeding time. They never miss that. What we're doing here is preserving just a small part of the gene pool of the brown pelicans. They do reproduce here, and the young fly free and go back to the wild, so there is some good in maintaining these birds that wouldn't survive otherwise.
Some of the friends of the brown pelican have problems beyond just caring for the birds. Pat and Roberta have been battling with the county zoning board over the use of Roberta's backyard for holding pens. Another couple of pelican protectors in Miami are having difficulties with their local government.
There you go, baby. Come on, let's go.
Harry and Darlene Kilton have rescued pelicans and kept them in pens for the past 8 years at Pelican Harbor's Seabird Station. This small strip of county-owned land is part of a causeway crossing Biscayne Bay. It is located along a pelican flight path in between a rookery island to the south and 2 big fishing piers to the north. The pelicans will have to move to new and improved pens at the other end of the peninsula to make way for a $3 million marina and restaurant complex. And the Keltons are uneasy about the county's offer of a 2-year license agreement. They want a 30-year lease to protect the future of the Pelican Sanctuary and the new structures that will have to be built to hold them.
Honey, would you let Stumpy out? She got locked in that north pen.
Last year, Harry and Darlene took in 420 sick and injured pelicans. There are over 70 permanently injured but reproducing pelicans in the pens. Harry explains why this is such an important location for the sanctuary.
This little island to the south produced about 48 baby pelicans last year. When we first started here, it was producing 7 pelicans. And we could go down there on almost any cool weather weekend and find 4 to 5 new dead pelicans hanging from the trees, strung up by fish hooks and fish line. Since we've started this effort here, we've only found 4 or 5 dead pelicans a year down there. That's from 4 or 5 a weekend to 4 or 5 a year. And the number of pelicans hatched there has grown from 7 pelicans when we started to 48 pelicans this season. They stop off here on their way home. It's not that we planned it that way, it's just that we stumbled into it. It exists. The big injury spot is up north, on the other side of the causeway. Their natural rookery is down south, and on their way home, they have to either fly through here or swim through here. And if they're hurt, if they're hooked and trailing a bunch of line, they'll stop in and try to get a free meal. And then we get the line off before they go back to the trees and get tangled up. Pelicans have a unique attraction toward man, like the dolphins. If you feed a pelican about twice, even if you hurt him while you're trying to treat an injury, the pelican understands that you're trying to help him, and he'll turn right around and forgive you for the hurt. A seagull won't, or a cormorant won't. If you hurt a cormorant or hurt a seagull in the process of treating them, they remember that and they'll stay away from you. But pelicans just like people, that's all.
The people we've seen that devote their time and resources to helping pelicans survive a changing world are in their own way carrying on the spirit of wildlife protection begun by Paul Kragle. Studies seem to indicate that the chances for pelican survival are much brighter in a future that looks bleak for so many endangered species. Although the brown pelican remains endangered west of Florida, in 1985 it was taken off the endangered species list in Florida and along the Atlantic coast. Yet the relationship between man and pelican remains fragile as the two try to share such a beautiful habitat. Ralph Heath is cautious but optimistic in his outlook.
The future of pelicans, I believe, is going to be pretty good in Florida as long as we can curtail, not stop because that's not going to happen, but at least curtail and protect the environment so that the entire habitat for not just pelicans, but all other species of birds and animals as well is protected. When man comes in and destroys the habitat for the wildlife, they don't just move down the street, it curtails their overall numbers. Certainly that's going to affect animals, land birds, and all the other species that are involved, not just to mention the impact it'll have on our marine creatures. But man has got to learn to conserve the environment, not just for the wildlife, but for himself as well, because the pollution that we see showing up in the birds is ultimately going to affect man, and that's what unfortunately too many people don't understand.
Naturalist Roger Torrey Peterson noted long ago that birds are a unique indicator of environmental quality, and what affects them will surely someday affect us. We must always watch the pelicans.
This program was funded in part by the Florida Public Broadcasting Service, Incorporated.